Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's episode of Governance, Corruption, and Justice. I'm yours truly, editor of Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilberg, and tonight we have with us a very distinguished gentleman. He is the head of corporate communications at the Guyana National Bureau of Standards. His name is Mr. Lloyd David, and he has been with the agency for over 20 years, over 2 decades. That's correct.
Yes.
All right, Mr. David, welcome to the program. Thank you for making the time to speak with us.
Thank you very much, Kiana. It's certainly a pleasure.
All right. So we know that the Ministry of Natural Resources, they have their own role to play where monitoring the oil sector is concerned. But the Guyana National Bureau of Standards, you guys have a very important role as well. And that speaks to monitoring the oil lifts, ensuring they're accurate. Before we get into any of the other details, that you're quite aware of, can you tell us a bit about the role of GNBS in the oil sector and how that's evolved?
Well, certainly, I will certainly do so. The Guyana National Bureau of Standards has a very multifaceted role in terms of playing that part in the oil and gas sector. Mm-hmm. If I look at it, if I categorize it properly, I'll think in terms of quantity, quality, and standards.
Okay.
What this means essentially that is in terms of quantity, we monitor the meters, the flow meters that dispense fuel from the FPSO onto the ship that transport the fuel. So we calibrate those meters, first of all. We observe the calibration of those meters. And then as they dispense, you also observe the process to ensure that those meters are working properly, right? So, and that's what we do across the petroleum sector, the petroleum industry generally, in terms of the petrol pump and all of that. But in terms of the FPSO, that's what we do in terms of quantity.
Okay.
Right? In terms of quality, we are responsible for taking samples of the crude.
Okay.
And of course, sealing those samples into containers and send them off for testing.
Where do they go for testing?
Well, the GGMC is responsible for testing. So we take the samples and we have the containers sealed and we arrange for the samples to be tested. So that has to do with the quality aspect.
How long does that aspect take, the testing part for the quality?
Well, this is something that I'm not sure about, but this testing is very necessary, and it like anything else, it must follow a process and should take some amount of time.
Okay.
All right. But in terms of the standards, we are, as you know, the national standards body. As our viewers know, we are the national standards body. And what we do, we adopt standards. We develop standards and we adopt standards to serve our various stakeholders within the various sector. That does not exclude the oil and gas sector. Right?
Okay.
So that is our role in terms of standards. We look around the world at the various international standards body. We also look at our standards needs here in Guyana, and we adopt the relevant standards to ensure that those standards are made available nationally to be utilized by our various stakeholders.
Now, I know monitoring, particularly for the oil sector, is quite new to our regulators here. So how much training has been done to prepare members of staff for ensuring the process of accurate measurements during oil lifts that's really protected?
Well, training came in 2 categories. We have to prepare, to move from land to the FPSO required to be lifted by the helicopter. So there was some amount of safety training involved there. The inspectors were sent to Trinidad for that training, which has to do with the let me see if I get it right, the emergency breathing system training, and also the tropical helicopter underwater escape training. So in case of an emergency, the inspectors know what to do in terms of ditching and all of that. So and still, be able to remain safe. So that's one aspect. And then, of course, the inspectors had to undergo the training that affect their work directly. And that training is measurement training to support the monitoring accuracy of the FPSO. That was a very comprehensive training. I think it was 5 days, if I can recall, and it was very intense. It was done by Bureau Veritas. They came, they sent the experts down here in Ghana, and they had the training. And of course, there are follow-up training, similar follow-up training that took place. So that was a very comprehensive training, and of course, it covered, aspects relating to flow process of the meter skid on the FPSO, verifying measurement points, equipment type, sample points, and valve sealing process. So they need to understand how to seal a valve after to ensure the calibration is not compromised and all of that. So that was a key training, and of course, these training allow our inspectors to have a grip on what they need to do in terms of the delivery of their service and start the various measurement services on the FPSO.
Okay. How many persons have undergone training or have been recruited for training?
Well, at the beginning, at Forest Oil, we just had about 5 inspectors. We hadn't a department directly to. We had a department to function, but it hadn't a name. But they underwent the training, in terms of building competence and all of that, and we began to monitor. Today we have 10. We have doubled the amount, 10 persons, including the head of department. And this is necessary because we have one FPSO at this time. Later in the year, we expect Lisa Unity, which is the second FPSO. We must have competent, trained staff to manage or monitor both FPSOs. So we are looking ahead. We are, in the forecast to make sure that we are able to reliably deliver and ensure that the wealth of the Guyanese people is protected.
So now that you have 10 individuals, or 10 inspectors, working in your oil department, I understand that your oil department came into effect this year?
Yes, that is what I was getting at earlier. We actually, it was in existence. It wasn't given a name. They were operating under the Legal Metrology Department. That's the department responsible for the implementation of the 1981 Weights and Measures Act, which has to do with weights and measure. So when we were given the responsibility to do this monitoring, we took a team from our Legal Metrology Department, separated them out and train them to perform the function. So basically, they operated under the umbrella of the Legal Metrology Department. I know I noticed some media places said that we now establish oil and gas. No, it's not like that. We actually had the persons to perform the function since Forest Oil, right? So what has happened now is that we finally establish the department and double the number of officers that they're able to carry out the various functions.
And those officers, they work on a rotational basis?
Yes, in terms of, they work on a rotational basis. What happens is that the whole cycle, if you can look at one of those officers, the whole cycle of him monitoring on the FPSO takes approximately 48 days. If he hasn't had his total vaccine, not fully vaccinated, because what is required now is if you're not fully vaccinated, you have to undergo a 14-day or 2 weeks quarantine period. And then you're taken onto the FPSO for just over a month to monitor what is happening out there, carry out your function as an individual. If you are fully vaccinated, you only spend 1 week in quarantine, and then you go out to the FPSO for that period. And we have to be fair to them because they're off land for so many days. When they come back, we can't just plunge them back into regular work on shore. We give them the opportunity to rest up, to have their businesses and so forth.
Okay. And how often or how many months do our officers spend out there?
Well, as I mentioned,
because I would believe that they monitor for every oil lift.
The thing is that there's always an officer out there. So when one is out there and preparing to come back, there is one in quarantine preparing to go
out.
So there's always
all year round.
All year round, there's an inspector or as you call it, officer out there performing that function.
Okay. So when they're out there, can you explain the process? Because I understand that they're not alone. There are other individuals who would have to be part of the process. The Guyana Revenue Authority as well would be part of that in terms of collecting the receipts, the oil lift receipts.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, the GNBS, our key role out there as it relates to monitoring of the FPSO and being out there has to do with measurements. All right, it's number one. We're concerned with measurements. Firstly, where we ensure that those meters are calibrated and they're working properly, so that when that fuel passes through it from the FPSO through onto the ship, the oil lifting ship, there is this accuracy going on. There's no compromise in terms of giving away the oil, giving away the crude or anything like that, as person might want to put it simpler, right? We want to ensure that the process is accurate, it is transparent, and also as it relates to the taking of the samples. But of course, we do not actually perform the test at this time, right?
Okay. Now, you spoke about ensuring that the process is not compromised. Have you found any incident or instance where the process seemed unusual, or everything has been up to standard since the officers have been?
Well, definitely GNBS has not found any of the any system being compromised or whatever the case might be. We have strict procedures in place and strict system in place. It's a sensitive industry, and we recognize that at the GNBS. So we of course, first of all, we ensure that we're very competent, so that even because incompetency can cause lapses and all of that. So
Yes.
it is important that we ensure that when we send persons out there, they are capable of performing the functions that are required. So that is one aspect of eliminating any possibilities of what you described earlier in terms of inconsistencies. Also, we have a good system in place, Prove It electronic system, where we provided real-time information as to what is happening, what is reading out there in terms of the meters. So we can be on land and be able to see what readings we're actually emanating from.
So you have that in
Yeah.
place right now,
Yeah,
real-time monitoring
we have real-time
of the oil.
monitoring of the oil. So of what is happening out there. So that is very important in ensuring everything works as.
And that process cannot be compromised.
That process cannot be compromised. Of course, we have our inspectors out there, and of course they do the calibration of the meters. But then at the time of lifting, our inspectors will be there watching and looking at the process. If it takes all day, as the fuel is, they look at the process. So if they see probably a variation, a fluctuation, they have the authority to raise an alert and cause, but we haven't experienced much of any of those at this time.
Okay. Now, I want to take you back to the LISA 2 operations. How are you coming along with expanding your resources for the new challenges that will come with that new operation?
Well, of course.
Because you have 10
Yeah.
for LISA 1. So do you expect to have another 10 to service LISA 2?
Well, actually, the 5 was adequate. There was a rotation. So the 5 we had earlier, they were adequate to perform the function on Lisa Destiny. But we anticipate that Lisa Unity is coming, so we had to bring on and begin to train the other 5. So that is how it works. So it works for them, because one officer takes just over a month. So by the time 5 months, going on to 6 months, it is this turn to go out back there. So the rotation is very fluid. It's very easy. And anticipating Lisa Unity coming, we have taken steps to bring on addition. That doesn't stop us from employing more persons. We know at the Bureau that the demand will continue to increase for staff. After a while, there might be some amount of burnout. It's not a normal environment here out there. And some people will be required to take their leave and all of that. So we have to, in time to come, add more persons, whether it's 3, 4, 5 more, to expand the oil and gas department of the GNBS, to be able to fully and easily meet the needs of the sector.
Now, I understand that you recently did an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the American Petroleum Institute. Can you explain what that MOU was about and how instrumental that partnership is going to be in transforming the agency and meeting the new requirements of the requirements of the sector?
Yes, we have on August 13th signed that MOU with the American Petroleum Institute. The GNBS recognized that API is well recognized, it's well renowned, it's known, it's a standard institution with the kinds of standards that are specific to the oil and gas and petroleum industry, right? They are very specific. Unlike ISO, which has a variation of standards dealing with health and safety, all other aspects, API deals specifically with what's happening in the petroleum industry. That's why it's named American Petroleum Institute, of course. So we recognize it's necessary to sign that MOU. And what that MOU allows us to do is it gives us a license to adopt the standards that are available, that have been produced by API. And these are well-recognized standards. They're implemented by petroleum departments across the world, right? So why not benchmark ourselves with the best rather than, And of course, there are other standards. Although API produces so many standards, we still have the testing aspect of fuel and all of that, which ASTM back in the day it was America Society for Testing and Materials, but they just call it ASTM International now. If someone wants to know more about that, they can actually Google and learn more about ASTM. That is it's an American standards institution, but world over, their standards are utilized world over, and that institution provides standards as it relates to the testing of petroleum. So we rely, apart from API providing most of the key standards that we will need here in Guyana, we still rely on ASTM International and also ISO to provide additional standards to help us to effectively deal with the current petroleum industry in Guyana.
Okay. Now, the government has said that it would be bringing on board a fiber optic cable to help with the offshore monitoring of the vessels during oil lifts. Can you explain the importance this project is going to have where GNBS's role is concerned?
Well, it's going to be a good thing. Like any other communication network improvement, it will enhance the sector in terms of being able to monitor. But we've already have systems in place. And I must tell you, Kiana, we have no plans to, discontinue the physical monitoring on the FPSO. Okay. Despite the fiber optic cable coming and all of that, which would improve communication and all of that, we still intend to have an officer station there to do physical monitoring of the operation, and so because we want to ensure that there is transparency in the sector, transparency in the process. Yes, we can see the figures, but then the human being there can see anything else that may arise. So it is necessary. We see the fiber optic as good. It will help with our real-time information, all of that. It further enhance that, but certainly we will not compromise in terms of, or step back in terms of, an inspector will no longer go there. We will continue to send our inspectors there.
Thank you very much, Mr. David. Now I'd like to conclude our interview with just your overall thoughts on the growth of our oil sector and the role you see Guyanese playing.
Well, my overall thoughts in terms of the oil and gas sector, for me, it is very good in terms of opening up opportunities for other sectors. What we found at GNBS that more persons are, and it is allowed for standardization, the use of standards, because prior to that, we had some challenges in terms of having persons, get on board with standards, become certified to international standards, have an appreciation for that. The GNBS definitely has benefited from that, because many of our stakeholders wanting to tap into the oil and gas sector are getting on board with our services, are getting certified, and you may have seen it in the news and so forth. So we have enhanced at the GNBS, but of course, it's a sector that certainly will bring benefits and real value to the lives of people in Guyana. Probably we need to be a little more patient from a personal perspective. We need to let the system work, and of course give the government an opportunity to show its worth, show that whatever they are implementing at this time will certainly benefit us, whether it's in the medium term or the long term. We might not necessarily need to, as a country, think in terms of immediate benefits, like directly when will we get it. We're a bit anxious. I think that there are opportunities that will help individuals and families, and so in terms of benefiting from what our oil industry or oil sector is going to offer.
Okay. Mr. David, I'd like to thank you very much for making the time to be here with us tonight. I do hope it's not the last time that we're going to see you.
No.
It was very enlightening for you to explain for us the role of GNBS and how it intends to evolve as the operations offshore expand. So with that, I'll thank you again for being here, and to our listeners and viewers on Facebook Live, we thank you for joining us for Governance, Corruption, and Justice, and we hope to see you back same time, same place next week. Thank you, and do have a blessed night.
Good evening.